Go ahead in 5.
Welcome to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. It's the Last Dance recap here. I didn't call it the Last Dance, so put that up your pipe and smoke it. Anyways, we got the heaviest hitters in North America right here. First and foremost, Tom McAllister. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks for having me, Nate.
Absolutely. Next, we got the heaviest hitter of them all in the Northern Hemisphere here, Joshua Griffith. Welcome to the show, my man.
Oh, thanks for having me way up from Canada.
Absolutely. Well, anyways, gentlemen, I want to get right into it. We had some conspiracies going on first and foremost in this episode of The Last Dance. Tom, take the floor, my man. You have any takes on the conspiracies?
I think when it comes to all the professional sports, hockey, basketball, baseball, and football, the one that has the most conspiracies is the NBA. From the, I believe, the frozen envelope with the draft lottery with Patrick Ewing, to basically the Lakers, Blazers, conference finals games, all that stuff. And of course we have, there were kind of like two conspiracies and both related to Michael Jordan's gambling. One conspiracy was that Michael Jordan's father was murdered because of his gambling issue. A second was that David Stern suspended Michael Jordan because of his gambling issues. So first off, when it comes to the gambling issues, I believe that Michael Jordan could afford any gambling that he did. He's probably one of the wealthiest professional athletes in the history of the sport. So I think that kind of makes it a little bit too difficult. Also, with David Stern, I have a very difficult time seeing one of the more shrewd businessmen in the last 20 to 30 years take out their most marketable person, be like, hey, you know what? But let's just go to the side for 18 months because of this gambling thing. I just can't see that fathom where, and with the conspiracy theorists, they believe that Stern did the 18th month suspension and also would throw games. It's almost like, wait, there's a disconnect there. So, I mean, I disagree with the notion about both of those conspiracies. Josh, how do you feel about those conspiracies?
How did I know that Nate was going to bring up conspiracies first? I should have just known. No, I don't think that there was much behind him. I mean, they were quashed pretty quickly by Michael. I mean, it's his documentary, so he gets to do that. If there was really something that went into the gambling debts and the murder of his father, I don't think that we'll ever know. And, we'll kind of bury that one with the Tupac mystery there. But the gambling thing, like you said, he was one of the wealthiest athletes. He signed some massive deals even when he was younger. And it never really became a problem for him gambling. It, monetary wise, it was a problem for other people almost, never for him. So, I thought it was, nice how they touched on it because we were curious how they were going to touch on, the murder of his father and things like that. I thought they did it pretty good. And they kind of, left the floor open for, us conspiracy guys if we wanted to talk about it. So it worked out perfectly, Nate.
Yeah, I have to agree. The fact that they even brought it up surprised me. I felt the murder with his father was kind of brushed aside fairly fast, but I was surprised they even brought it up to begin with. Going on Tom's point, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. It makes no business sense whatsoever to suspend the biggest player in your league's history. It just makes it makes no sense, no practical sense at all. What was pretty interesting though, they went into his baseball career, and what I didn't know originally is that he had a 13-game hitting streak to begin with. And you saw his former manager Terry Francona, formerly of Tom's favorite team, the Boston Red Sox. He believes that he could have played professional baseball had he had a certain amount of at bats. Joshua? Do you have an opinion about whether he probably could have played big league baseball or not?
So I love the Michael Jordan baseball era, even how small it was. This is kind of the first start to the Michael Jordan that I got when I was a kid. I was about 3 or 4, and my dad was a huge baseball fan. So, he really brought this up that, Michael Jordan's coming to play baseball, and he'll never make it. But no, I agree with with what you're saying and what Terry Francona too was talking about, and another.
Whether he
Um,
probably
I think
could have played big league baseball or not.
so. I love the Michael Jordan baseball era, even how small it was. This is kind of the first start. Oh, I'm gonna repeat myself. I love that. You guys, sorry, I thought I was going a little bit crazy there hearing that back, but that's fine. I love hearing myself back. So where was I? I love the Michael Jordan baseball era. I have a Michael Jordan baseball card up on the back uh, bookshelf here. I thought it was really fascinating how in depth they went into it. Like you said, I did not think that they were going to go nearly that in depth into it. What about you, Tom? What did you think of the baseball part there? Because I could probably talk forever about it.
I think with the baseball era, it was kind of like, the one thing I thought that was very interesting was Jerry Reinsdorf was like, I'm still going to pay Michael his contract. That's one point that I think was key during this whole time, because if Michael decided to unretire and he wasn't paid his contract, Michael would be a free agent. So Jerry Reinsdorf was like, no, what? Let me bring him in. Where did he go? He went to Jerry Reinsdorf. So I wish they kind of explained that relationship a little bit more, where it's like he's his most fashionable, marketable player for basketball and he goes over to his other team. Jerry Reinsdorf kind of does bring up the challenge from switching from basketball to baseball, because how tough is it to hit breaking balls that, they kind of pointed out how, when you're seeing fastballs, Jordan was doing okay. Once they started throwing him breaking balls, he really did struggle. I think it would have been a challenge for him to make it to the major leagues, not saying they wouldn't do it. Because, hey, if you're a team that's struggling to make attendance, but all of a sudden you call Michael Jordan up to the 40-man roster, I think a lot of people would be like, know what, I'll show up. I'll see Michael Jordan. Hey, I can say I saw him play baseball, because he would be a draw even if he wasn't playing basketball. Nate, what do you think? Do you think Jordan would have made it to the major leagues?
I think so, because there was, after his initial slump, you saw steady improvement, and then he basically hit over 200, which isn't much, but he was really in a hole and he dug himself out of it, and he saw a challenge in it, like most other things, that you didn't really have to do a whole lot to challenge Jordan in a lot of different ways. So I think I could have seen him. I'm never going to tell Jordan no, because he's going to show up on my front door and he's going to challenge me to something. He's going to whoop my ass in, and he's going to make me look like a fool publicly. So I'm definitely not going to say he wouldn't have made the big leagues, because I think he would have. But here's another thing: if there was never a baseball strike, do you think he stays with baseball, Tom?
I would say no. I think, I felt like him playing minor league baseball, it kind of humbled him again, and he kind of enjoyed it. And they mentioned the part two in the documentary where it said they were talking about replacement players with the baseball strike, and how, oh yeah, we're going to bring up replacement players. And Michael was like, nah, I'm not going to be a replacement player. He wanted to be a real player. I could see maybe like Michael Jordan could find a niche on a team where he could be a defensive replacement, or he could come on and steal a base because of his athleticism. So those I think would be ways they would deploy him. I don't see him being a starter 162 games. Josh, how do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I thought it was really cool, just with Jerry Reinsdorf talking about how they had to make the jump for him right to AA ball because of literally the media facilities not being big enough to hold and house all the media that were going to be there. And I think that was a really big hindrance to start his baseball career, having to just jump right to AA, which is, it's massive. And you could see that, the steady growth that Nate was talking about after a certain amount of time after he was getting these at bats. And then too, Nate also mentioned on just, it's Michael Jordan's drive. I mean, I could 100%, I could have seen him, if this lockout and the strike didn't happen, I could have seen him continue on with baseball to, some point. I would have imagined that he still wanted to go back to basketball because he still obviously had that love for the game, but I could definitely see him having cracked a major league roster, or maybe not, like Tom said, not being a, 162 game player, but still definitely playing some major league baseball.
Well, here's another point. I personally think the baseball time was necessary for Jordan because they touched on it even in the documentary, which I thought was interesting. Is just baseball's just even at the professional level, it's just different. There's just not nearly. I mean, obviously there's stress in it, but there's just not the consistent pressure there is probably at the other major sports. Deion Sanders even said himself, he was, and journalists have said the same thing. He was just a completely different guy when he was playing baseball. There just wasn't the constant pressure of the NFL life. I mean, we get to play in the park kind of an atmosphere in professional baseball. Um, do you guys personally feel that the time off was good for Jordan, Tom?
Well, I think the major difference is, in a baseball game, you really can't put up your best player with the last at bat. It just happens. I think that's the major difference where it's almost like, there's not as much critique where, when the game's on the line, you really don't know who's going to be at bat. You might know who's pitching, but you'll never know who's at bat. While in basketball, last play of the game, that's on you. When you're the best player on the team and the best player in the league, if, your team doesn't win a close game, that's totally on you. In a baseball game, it might not be. If you're a pitcher, you might not even pitch that game. If you're a baseball player, you know what? You didn't get up into the ninth inning. The guy got out before you got your chance to take a swing at the bat. So I think that's one of the major differences. And I think also being a minor league was also totally different. He was still signing autographs and everything. I think though AAA, he might have not performed as well. Could he have eventually made it? I think eventually someone would give him a shot for, publicity, but it's also the Jordan drive. Tell him not to do something, he'll do it. Josh, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, like we touched on a little bit before, it's just that drive too. And then I think there was a little bit just of a desire to just kind of do this for his father as well. With his father being so predominantly in baseball and stuff and him playing it as a kid, which I really loved how they went into in the documentary, into just having his brother come in and, talking about, baseball and just the push of his dad and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed that. And I agree with, with you both there. Just, he probably could have made it. There would have been some hindrances, but he, had that added value of also being, Michael Jordan.
Yeah. Also, he wasn't the best player on the field in baseball. So there wasn't kind of that push for him to be always on his teammates, always on him in the locker room. He was just kind of one of the guys at that point. He wasn't the star. I mean, obviously he was signing autographs, but there wasn't just that pressure to be the guy like there was with the Chicago Bulls. Switching subjects now, we also saw the Bulls post Jordan in that era, and predominantly with Scottie Pippen. They took to him as a leader, probably much more because there just wasn't the pressure. But when the pressure came on, and he didn't get his way, he sat on the bench because Kukoc was going to get the last shot. Does that change your opinion to Scottie Pippen at all? We'll start with you, Tom.
I think that was another thing I'm very glad, and I think they addressed very well in this documentary, because that was one of the most memorable moments of the Chicago Bulls when Jordan was gone. That controversy, how you had Scottie Pippen, who, was the sidekick. He got elevated from Robin to Batman, supposed to be the franchise player. And here's a crucial point where, they're down 2-0 in the series. If they don't hit this shot, they could be down 3-0. And they decide to go with Tony Kukoc, and how Scottie Pippen takes his way out. You kind of see Bill Cartwright call out Scottie Pippen. You see it during then. And, Scottie Pippen was contrite about what he did. He realized very quickly what he made was a mistake. I'm surprised they didn't mention how Scottie Pippen and Tony Kukoc had that issue before, that maybe that little bit of resentment. But Josh, how did you feel about how they covered the Scottie Pippen sitting out during the last seconds of a playoff game?
I thought they could have, like you said, gone into a little bit more depth about it. They were obviously doing the interviews with Scottie Pippen and Tony Kukoc already. So it wouldn't have been hard to, kind of get a little bit more perspective about it. And yeah, like you said, go into maybe the controversy that they had from, the Olympics in the past and things like that. But it was a nice view into kind of the Bulls without Michael Jordan. And I didn't know if we were going to get that from this documentary. I didn't know if they were just going to be because, oh, well, it's not Michael Jordan. But it's pretty clear that they're also making it very Bulls centric, as you could see in some of the other things.
Yeah, and it was interesting because this wasn't the first time you saw Scottie Pippen's ego involved in the series at all. And I think he was a guy who started from kind of a small town in Arkansas, came up the hard way, got a growth spurt later in life, developed later, and then he hit superstardom. So you see, he was known in, I was telling Tom in the green room, he was known in the Chicago area as No Tippin' Pippen, known for notoriously stiffing waiters and bartenders and things of that nature. But and then you saw the way he was treating Jerry Krause. I mean, his ego definitely got too big. But with that being said, I look at him as a forward thinker. I think bartenders and waiters get tipped way too much a lot of times. So I think that he has the European style of things. You know what? They got to earn their money around here. Scottie Pippen, you're a forward thinker. You're not selfish.
Well, Jerry Krause sure definitely made him earn his money, so I can see where he's coming from. And Reinsdorf, yeah. I think, okay, do you guys think that the Reinsdorf thing, like, I mean, we've talked about it too a little bit before on past episodes of this series. Like, Jerry Krause is really painted as the bad guy when, you got to think that the decisions ultimately go to Reinsdorf. Like, so if Phil Jackson's not coming back and you own the team and you actually want Phil Jackson back, wouldn't you just be like, hey, no. Tom?
I think it would have been an interesting documentary if Jerry Krause, who since passed away, was interviewed for this. That's like the one missing element. While it was very well documented that Krause had a sour relationship with both Pippen and Jordan, and we see the documentation of it in this series, you know what? The only person who Jerry Krause answers to is Jerry Reinsdorf. So Jerry Reinsdorf could be like, know what? Phil's coming back. Michael's coming back. We're going to keep going until someone knocks us off. So I think that's kind of the one thing that should have been addressed. But another question that I had that popped up to me was, they kind of talked how Michael Jordan planned on retiring, when he was playing with the Dream Team. My question is this: if Michael Jordan was not on the Dream Team, would he have retired after the 1993 season? Nate, how do you feel about that?
I don't think so, because they made mention of that, the fact that he wanted to be a three-peater. He wanted to be one over Bird and Magic. So I think that was another thing that, again, didn't meet much motivation, but it motivated him. So I definitely think he was at least there for the three-peat. I think the media was really weighing on. I mean, the media effect of the Jordan phenomenon was just really weighing on the guy. And I think he probably retires even without his dad's passing. I really believe that. Going back to what Joshua was talking about with Jerry Krause, I think it's really, really interesting because they've made Jerry Krause out to be the bad guy, but I think him and Jordan are more alike than anything else. Do you guys have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it because they both have that winning drive mentality. And even something actually that Michael Jordan said, I don't know if it was in the 7th or the 8th episode, I can't recall it directly, but he talked about having a winning, they were asking about a play or something. He was like, oh, we have a winning team. We have a winning organization kind of thing. And he said it. And I was like, well, that's so weird. And it was when he was back after baseball and stuff, but it just, it was kind of a weird juxtaposition, with what Jerry Krause always had been saying about it being an organization, it being more than just one person, but Michael. And it almost seemed like, that baseball and that refresh. And, to what Tom was asking, yes, I do think he still would have retired if he had not have played for the Dream Team. But I mean, that I think that, the media stuff and that was almost weighing on him more.
Yeah. How about you? Do you have an opinion about the dynamic with Krause and Jordan?
I think, are they the similar type of person? I think both of them were competing for two different things. Jordan was competing to be the champion, to be the best. Krause was competing to get recognition, because you have to look around. If you're Jerry Krause, you're the one that picked Phil Jackson out of nowhere from, I think, the CBA to become an assistant coach, and made a bold decision to fire Doug Collins and give Phil Jackson his first coaching job. You draft Scottie Pippen out of Central Arkansas. You make a trade to get that done. So there's a lot of shrewd moves that if you're Jerry Krause, you're like, wait a minute, well, what am I doing? Where's my recognition? And Krause probably resented the fact that he kind of built this, and he's like, I'm not getting praised for it, and he's kind of played as the bad guy. And I think when he was the only executive, though, where he's like, organizations win titles. If he kind of expressed that in a manner where it's like, a lot of people help the players, all that, okay, but he kind of put, it kind of sent the wrong message to, I think, their players. And I think there's some other things like with the negotiations that also kind of irked people when, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen were making nowhere near as much money as they probably should have been when it came to their NBA salaries.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think they're one of those people that takes motivation. I mean, they see motivation in everything. And at the end of the day, I think ego got the better of Jerry Krause. But you did have to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was much more right than he was wrong. Pre-Jordan, that is. I mean, before Jordan left, that is, I should say.
Well, I mean, even during Jordan, I mean, can you fault him for making some of the contract decisions that he made? I mean, like, Scottie Pippen's the one that signed that long contract. It wasn't, it's his job to get the best contracts for his organization. So, I mean, I don't fault him for that. Looking at the business side of things, like you said, yes, he probably could, and then Tom mentioned too, he could have came out with his whole, it's an organizational thing. He could have came out with it way better than he did. But I don't definitely fault him for that. And I don't think that he does get as much limelight as he deserves.
Yeah, I have to agree. And they're kind of piling it on him. Speaking of the Jordan dynamic, it kind of went into a lot more detail about what kind of a teammate he was, particularly in the later years. I mean, how pressing he was and demanding he was of his teammate. And then they went into the infamous Steve Kerr situation where he ended up punching him. You guys have a take on that whole dynamic? How about you, Tom?
I think first off, Steve Kerr is probably one of the most luckiest people on the face of this earth. He played for the Chicago Bulls, and he played for the San Antonio Spurs. He has won countless titles. He was given the New York Knicks job when Phil Jackson rose to power, gained the position of executive, whatever he was, but he decides to go to Golden State. And he had Kevin Durant show up. We won multiple titles. So Steve Kerr, I think, is one of the luckiest people on the face of the NBA planet. When it comes to him telling the story of being Michael Jordan's teammate, it goes to prove that Jordan was someone who would actively get on you and almost try to exploit your weakness, where it's kind of something where, I don't know if modern day players could take that, where you get someone who keeps on riding you, and Kerr fought back, and he's, apparently Jordan fought back better. So he lost that one. But I think too, it's like one of the things, it shows the control of Phil Jackson, where Phil could address his superstar and, Jordan would be like, yeah, you know what, I'm sorry, called up Steve Kerr, they apologized and went on and had a strong relationship. Josh, what do you think about the Steve Kerr, Michael Jordan incident?
Well, I thought just to touch on the last point you made there, I thought it showed a lot of respect between Phil Jackson and Jordan. Just, that, they were able to, have this incident, and Michael was like, I'm sorry. And I think that goes to with just how frustrated Michael was with Phil not being brought back the next season. You could see that level of trust and respect that they had gained. When it comes to the Steve Kerr stuff, I absolutely love Steve Kerr as a coach right now, and I could listen to that guy talk all day long about anything. And I did not know this story beforehand. Before watching this episode, I watched the first one last night at midnight when it came out in Canada. And then I watched the second one, the 8th episode today, and I did not know that story. It was so awesome. Just the bonding, though, that you could see was happening in that locker room when he came back. And he's like, no, these people haven't done it. They haven't won championships. They're just coming to a championship organization. So it was really cool to see him come like that. And like you said, bust his teammates and motivate them.
Yeah, what I found interesting is they didn't tell the actual real side of the story of what actually happened. The New York Times actually came out with an article shortly after the incident, and what actually happened was Steve Kerr actually made a call. He called over about 20 goons actually and showed up outside the Bulls facility. All had their pistols out, drawn to Michael and everything, and Kerr had his 9mm pointed to Jordan and said, "What's up, man? You want to make this a big deal? Huh? Give me them J's, Jordan. Give me them J's." And when he wouldn't give up the shoes, he pistol whips Jordan, and he handed over those 11s like it was nothing. Steve Kerr is a hard motherfucker.
We're going to see Hard Knocks with Steve Kerr. That's going to be the next documentary that we're seeing. And we're breaking it down.
Kerr is thugged out.
Steve Kerr's back in the Bronx of Chicago.
Yeah, and it was also interesting that George Karl, who Tom and I have actually both read his book that came out a couple of years ago. He completely ignored him in the NBA Finals, and they were actually friendly. They played golf together. They had the North Carolina background and everything. And yet another example of Jordan taking something very slight and making it a big deal to motivate himself. Tom, do you have a take on that?
I feel like Michael Jordan is the master at finding motivation. And he used the point of like George Karl didn't come over to me. If George Karl came over to him and said something to him, Michael Jordan would have used what George Karl said to him as motivation. It didn't matter what George Karl would have done. Just him seeing George Karl, and it would take so much for basically not to motivate Michael Jordan to absolutely go out and crush you. But that's what Jordan was great at. Josh, how did you feel about Jordan responding to Karl's, I guess, slight in public?
I love it because, you hit the nail on the hammer there when you said he would have found any way to make that some kind of motivation, right? Like, I mean, George Karl could have paid for all of his kids' university tuition, bought him a car, a new house, and did all of his housework for the next week. And Michael was like, thinks I need a new car, thinks my kids need university money. Like, he would have found some way to use it as motivation for himself. And I think that that's one of the things that I wrote down in my notes is just how he always was able to find things to motivate himself like that. Like, I wish that I could, watch something on TV and be like, oh, yeah, you say that? Well, I'm going to go ahead and just, it was crazy. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, here's the thing about Jordan. We have a completely double standard when it comes to looking at Jordan. Some people call it motivation, but let's be honest, it's pettiness. I mean, he takes the most petty of things and makes it a big deal. And, and then we say, oh, that's Jordan. Imagine if LeBron did the same thing. I mean, it would be completely blown out of proportion and completely taken a different direction.
LeBron does kind of do that.
How so? I haven't seen.
I mean, think of the against the Warriors in the finals when they're down 3-1. Katie started chatting. Katie started talking up and all this stuff, and then LeBron just came back and put it. Yeah, he does it a little bit differently, but I mean, like, you could see that that he took that and he used it as a fuel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just don't see like the same degree. I think LeBron can be petty, but I mean, he takes pettiness to a completely different level, in my opinion. And it's interesting because do you think there's a double standard, Tom, when looking at Jordan as compared to the rest of our modern athletes?
I think, the one thing I think Jordan had an advantage of when he was playing was there was no social media,
Right.
because, they're pulling stuff up off of, oh, he said this when they're 14 years old on Twitter or something and quoted a rap lyric and all that stuff. So I think that's one thing Jordan didn't have to deal with. When it comes to like the competitiveness, um, I think athletes are more like, all right, I want to win. Who can I win with? So a lot of their decisions are more business decisions, like where they join up together. Where, Kevin Durant was in a position where he's like, no, what, I can stay in Oklahoma City. I'm pretty close to beating the Warriors. Let me stay here and finish the job. But he went over and won his championships with the Warriors, which I think is something that kind of doesn't show that mentality. And I think, outside of today, I think we don't know if someone was motivating them. Like, oh, I got to be better than this guy. I got to be better than that guy. Because one of the things with the Larry Bird Magic Johnson rivalry they always talk about is how Magic would be like, what is Larry doing today? I got to work harder than him. And, I think it was vice versa for that. So I think it's kind of tough. I don't think it's as intense when it comes to, Jordan motivating himself and taking those petties. For the most part, I want to say most of those motivation or slights were just temporary. Some might have lasted longer. But Josh, how do you feel about the whole, players finding motivation or just being petty?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say that players aren't petty nowadays because we're talking about Kevin Durant and the guy's got like 8 social media burner accounts that he has to like flood the negative comments with. No, KD is so good. So yeah, that's pettiness at an ultra level that, like kind of Tom brought up. They didn't have social media back then. And then I just wrote down actually when you're talking, like, so if I know some of the stories were leaked and stuff like that, and people knew about some of the other things, but I didn't really see Michael Jordan as being so petty, or I knew he was ultra competitive, but yeah, that pettiness side, I didn't see it come out until maybe this documentary where, you're seeing all the behind the scenes stuff. What do you think, Tom?
I think one of the key things with the pettiness was when Nick Anderson made that quote. He's like, oh, 45 is no 23. And Horace Grant, who was playing with the Magic, was just like,
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh boy. And you heard him, he probably used that quote the whole time. And where it was like, he was at all the off season to get prepared. And I think he mentioned it one time too, like in a presser the next year, oh, the 45 to 23, blah, blah, blah. He kept it going. But one of the things I found very interesting was when he was on the set of Space Jam and he invited all the NBA players, hey, let's play together. Let's play together. And he's secretly scouting them. Nate, how do you felt about that?
It's kind of just another story to tack on another. I mean, he looked at everything as a way to gain an advantage. Just another thing. I mean, he takes something slight and he tries to use it to his advantage. I think it just shows he's the consummate competitor. What I'm curious to hear your guys' opinion about, is there a double standard when looking at someone like Jordan in the sense of sensitivity? Because here's a guy who retired twice. One because he basically felt the media was mean to him, or it was just too much, and he retires. The second time, he doesn't get his way, essentially, with personnel, so he retires again. If a player like in today's world had done something similar, I think they'd face a lot more scrutiny than Jordan does. How do you feel about that, Josh?
I think, I mean, you kind of see it. You don't see it necessarily with athletes going out so much on top, but I can give you the example like Calvin Johnson went out kind of on his own accord. He didn't necessarily go out on top, and there wasn't all the circumstances, but it was definitely kind of like, oh, what's going on here? And I think he had made those decisions, and obviously he has other things that he was doing and he's very passionate about. Like, I'm sure, he was golfing every single day after he retired kind of deal. So, as long as he had solace in what he did in his NBA career and was happy with it, I don't really have any problems with either of the retirements because he went out on top. And I think we've talked about this on like maybe past episodes of this or on the round table, but like athletes don't necessarily do that much anymore. And Michael Jordan wasn't dethroned. Nobody ever took it over like Tom has said before. So, Tom, what do you think about all that?
I think the reason why he didn't have as much scrutiny the first time Jordan retired, you got to be like, all right, his father passed away. So a lot of people were connecting the dots with that Jordan retiring was connected to his father's untimely passing. The second thing with it too is, we mentioned like Magic and Larry had a rivalry, so they kind of split the difference. When Jordan got on top, there was no one that could dethrone him. If let's say he didn't win 3 in a row, he could find that fuel. He couldn't find that fuel anymore, and he kind of maybe was burnt out with the media scrutiny because at the third championship, the media didn't turn against the Chicago Bulls. They went against Michael Jordan. And he was kind of like, know what, let me step away, and he could have been burnt out because he didn't have that challenge because Michael Jordan thrived off the challenges. He needed like a new set of players to come up. He needed the Shaquille O'Neal, Anthony Hardaway to come back to finally like elevate his game and be like, I need to teach these guys a new lesson. So he kind of needed that changing of the guard to occur.
Right. Do you guys feel that had LeBron done the same thing after his third win, do you think he faces a lot more scrutiny than Jordan would have?
No. Because of, again, what he's doing behind the scenes. Like I would imagine that he's already got an agency that he's run. So, I mean, he still would have been involved in the NBA. I'm sure that he would have even got more involved. Adam Silver would have brought him in for, other aspects. He would have done more, started doing more movie work than that shitty one he did with Amy Schumer and Bill Hader. Yeah. That one sucked. We'd finally get Space Jam 2, but also too, we got to bring back Space Jam. We got to talk about Space Jam 1 before this is all over. So no, I don't think the scrutiny would have been high. What do you think, Tom?
I think it's a little bit more common. You mentioned, I feel like if you're the best at your position in the NFL for the Detroit Lions, you retire early because there was also Barry Sanders who walked away. You have Andrew Luck who also walked away on top. So it's not uncommon. People are kind of used to it. I think the reason why it was shocking was because as good as Barry Sanders was in the discussion for being the best player at his position, he was not the marketing icon of Michael Jordan because Michael Jordan was trying to be, was he the best athlete ever in all sports? He was up there competing against Muhammad Ali and Babe Ruth. Barry Sanders wasn't at that level. So I think that's why they question it. And I think if LeBron walked away now, I think he's mid-30s. So people might be like, they might understand it. They might be like, oh, will he come back? But I think if LeBron did retire, like let's say immediately, I think he would face some scrutiny.
Right. That's kind of the same way I view it. I think there is a little bit of a double standard when we look at today's athletes and apply the same lens to Michael Jordan. With that being said, they brought up the 72-10 team when actually Jordan's first full year back. In your guys' opinion, is that the best team ever assembled in basketball history?
Yes. Yeah. Close second, the Warriors team from 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, that's overall looking at the body of work that they did and just, I mean, I love the comment about Scottie Pippen looking at the schedule and be like, man, we're not going to lose for 3 months.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. And I guarantee you with how good the West was, that's not something that you look at the schedule and do, but just the team that was assembled and how everything came together with, the off season and things with Steve Kerr and Michael Jordan pushing everybody. And it was set up, but I would love to see that team go against the Warriors team. How do you feel, Tom? Is that the best team for you or what? He just muted himself and then unmuted himself?
Yeah.
Now unmute yourself again and give us your answer.
I think it's the best team ever assembled.
Yeah.
Definitely, because you know what? It don't mean a thing without a ring. Sorry, Golden State.
That's what I thought about.
All right, now I'm back. Sorry for the technical glitch. But one of the things I would say is out of all the teams I've seen, I would have to go with the 96 Bulls because just look at them in the playoffs. They won 15 of the first 16 playoff games they had, or 14 of the first 15, and it felt like they kind of were like, let's wait on it going forward. So I think that kind of shows their dominance was no one even got close. People were hyping up a team where you had Shaquille O'Neal, who was probably one of the arguably the best person to play his position in his prime. Penny Hardaway, who was another all-star, who probably, if he didn't get hurt, would also be a Hall of Famer. And the Bulls didn't lose a game to him. That was probably the biggest challenge to him. So, I mean, I got to go with the 96 Bulls from the teams I've seen.
Yeah, and also when people take a look at regular season records, I think they showed the stat that the Bulls actually had the better overall record, playoffs included in the NBA Finals, and they actually won a ring in Golden State. Anyway, guys, we alluded to it earlier about what kind of a teammate Jordan is. And,
damn it, I thought you were talking Space Jam. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
We're going to get the Space Jam. Calm your tits.
Okay.
God damn.
Okay, I'll mute myself.
Anyway, I forgot what I was just going to say. God damn. Oh, yeah. What kind of a teammate Jordan would be to today's athletes? Could you imagine if he was teammates with Kevin Durant? What would that be like? Josh.
Durant would be traded.
Yeah.
He would demand a trade. His social media accounts would be so upset. No, dude, I'll just bring up an example, and this is not just because I'm Canadian, but if you look at some of the recent stuff that's come out in hockey culture with coaches and things like bullying and verbal abuse and things like that, like some of the stuff that was going on back then, that's going right to HR and you're getting talked to. Did it have to do with Michael Jordan being Michael Jordan? I mean, does it go on now, behind the scenes for star athletes? I'm sure it still does, to the level of that maybe, and of belittling executives like Tom has alluded to already that, that they were doing. I don't think so, but I think it's definitely not something that he would get away with to that extent nowadays.
Oh, no. Yeah, Kevin Durant would probably file some sort of a sexual assault case against Jordan or something. It's an unsafe work environment. I have to protect myself. But it's funny because that was only, less than 25 years ago. That's not that significant amount of time for such a culture change.
Well, I mean, Jordan did recognize the dominance of the UConn women's basketball team.
Yeah.
So you got to give him credit for that when, because Scotty Burrell went to UConn, and, it mentions too how he was riding Scotty Burrell, and he was able to just take it like, all right, whatever. Like he kind of like really didn't respond, and like he didn't pout. And I think it's also too, I think that culture has changed where it's more like you're more about pumping players up than like, knocking them down and building them up.
Yeah. And it's funny, most sports, if you look at the hazing that went on behind the scenes just over, in the 90s, 80s, 70s, it was just completely different. I mean, the hazing was just absolutely brutal in most sports, but now you just don't get the sense, and it's kind of considered an old boys mentality to have the hazing mentality. But it's just funny that you probably don't see another guy like Jordan in the league, a star player that really rides the rest of the players the way he does.
Half the players are during the off season, they're on a banana boat in Florida with 6 other people from 6 different other teams.
Yeah,
they're all going out for dinner and partying after. And I mean, you could see Michael shared that level of respect with certain people, like with him going golfing with Danny Ainge from the Celtics before the finals. That's somebody he looked up to. The Celtics. That was a team that he was trying to emulate and be better than. But also too, like you could see the same things he was saying during it, like, I'm gonna whoop you like tomorrow, like, and we don't get that nowadays. Now they just go out for dinner and then it's like, okay, no, we finish the game, we'll have a big hug.
Yeah, right. Tom,
How about the part, when they played Gary Payton, who, it was kind of like documented, like, oh, Gary Payton, in that Sonics series in 1996, Jordan averaged under 30 points a game. And a lot of people credited Gary Payton's defense. And then you saw Jordan's response to Gary Payton saying, like, oh, I had a strategy, I had this, I had that. I wish we guarded him. I'm not saying the series would have been different. And Jordan was just like,
Yeah, I thought that was so funny because Gary Payton's a trash talker from Oakland. I mean, that's just the way he played basketball. He's just rough and aggressive and everything. And in his interview, he was Mr. Tough Talk and everything. And then you pan to Jordan, and he absolutely laughs his ass off at that response. I mean, Gary Payton would have looked more masculine with a cock in his mouth than that response. I mean, that was just the absolute perfect response from Jordan. How did you feel about that, Josh?
I loved it. And that was like the perfect, like, to sum up that episode, like, too, just Jordan. Like, no, and then you could see too, like, that's one of those guys, he ain't going golfing with Gary Payton and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, the glove couldn't keep with him. He maybe thought he could, but Michael, I loved it. No, I loved it. I thought it was perfect.
I felt Gary Payton, because a lot of those players knew in the NBA at that time, just don't motivate Michael. And I think Gary was kind of like, he's like, nope. Even it's past. He's like, I felt like I did a good job. The numbers show I did a good job. But he was still like, he didn't push the envelope too much.
Like, PG Anderson screwed the pooch for Orlando.
Yeah, Nick Anderson. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's another interesting point because we've talked all about it, but just the rivalries he had in the East. I mean, just that he took personally. I mean, he took it personally when he played the Knicks. He took it personally when they played the Orlando Magic. And what they're teasing about in the next episode is he took it personally when he played the Indiana Pacers. And Reggie Miller legitimately thought they were the better team.
I think you're not going to beat a Michael Jordan team unless you believe in yourself that, like, no, he's great, but we can beat him. That's the one thing you can say. And I think it was like familiarity, where it was like, the Pacers were probably like, know what, we just need to get one or two breaks, because they weren't that far off from the Bulls when you look at it. And it was a good matchup back and forth. I remember Michael Jordan getting suspended for fighting Reggie Miller. So I wonder how their relationship is. And I wonder if Michael Jordan's going to respond to Reggie Miller's comments in the next episode. But Josh, how did you feel about the Bulls-Pacers rivalries in the mid to late 90s?
I thought they were good. I mean, I thought it really like set the tone, and it was kind of like the last bit of that kind of basketball we saw until the Pistons had their year again. But I thought it was good, and how they portrayed it, and I'm really excited to see some of the stuff with Reggie Miller, and I loved it. That he had, like, you talked about before, and had Reggie Miller at the training facility, and he was scouting him because you could see that Michael Jordan was like, talent respects talent. So he noticed, and he's like, man, I got to get this kid. He thinks he's the next kid. I want to get him. And I'm also curious to see is what kind of a relationship they have, because I don't know, like, I've never seen, they're not, ever together or anything like that. You don't ever hear of things like that. So, I'm curious. It doesn't sound like it's like, an Isaiah Thomas fracture or anything like that, but it definitely sounds like there's some animosity there.
Oh, I already know there's some good one-liners in there. Jordan had to have said to Reggie that you're not even the best basketball player in your family. There's no way that didn't come out. I mean, and on top of that, if you remember that series, Reggie Miller actually hit a game-winning shot in that series. I think it was either game 5 or 6 that Reggie Miller hit a game-winning shot in that series. And so, yet again, we're probably going to see another story where Jordan feels slighted out of the limelight, and he took it as motivation to automatically bury Reggie Miller. Do you have a take, Tom?
I think, because they kind of touched on, like, if he talked trash about Dan Marley, he's definitely going to talk trash about Reggie Miller, because they kind of left them untouched so far. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, definitely some good one-liners in there for sure. And again, it's a good thing. I, they're going to have their last two episodes next week. I find the series absolutely riveting, but at the same time, they're just the stories I feel are kind of more of the same, just different opponent in different faces. Jordan takes Slight somewhere, uses it as fuel, buries them. Takes another person, uses it as fuel, buries them. And so it's kind of like, okay, we're ready for the finale and we're still going to watch even though we know how it ends. That goes to show you how good of a series it is. Do you guys have anything you guys want to bring up or anything you want to end on?
How did it end? No, I'm just kidding.
No,
I agree. Actually, now that you brought that up, it is a lot of the same. Okay, Michael gets adversity. Somebody says something. Here's his motivation, right? I would have almost liked them to go into some of the other stuff, like the Space Jam thing. Like I loved how they, showed he wanted the facility. Hey, build me a facility, and that was so cool to see. Like, yeah, I'm gonna get a whole facility with gym. I'm gonna get all these players because you got to think Muggsy Bogues, Patrick Ewing, Charles Barkley,
Tom
that
Bradley.
yeah.
Best. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were all already on the set around the times, right? So there's, there's stuff with them, and then getting like Reggie Miller and all these other people. And like, I wish they would have gone in a little bit more in detail with that stuff, with the Space Jam stuff. Maybe mention Bill Murray a little bit more. And then too, just some of the some of the like we talked about at the very beginning of this episode, just the gambling stuff and about his dad. We figured they would probably kind of just gloss over it, but I could have used it a little bit more. What do you think, Tom?
I would say the one thing going back, they probably should have maybe explained the trial, or like how they arrested the people, because that was kind of just left vague.
Nothing.
It was just like, it wasn't a mob, and just, it does seem like wrong place, wrong time. But it's also, like we said before, it's Michael's documentary, so Michael might not have wanted that to have been in the documentary
or feel comfortable with it in the documentary, which 100% makes sense.
I think they did a much better job of shutting up the secret suspension than they did the killing of his father, because what the conspiracy theorists believe is that he didn't pay the gambling debts, even though he had them, and thought he was above paying, and that's what got his father killed. Not saying I believe that, but that's what they believe, and I don't think they quite did enough to shut up the conspiracy theorists out there.
No, apparently not. So I was about to run off to my kitchen and get my tinfoil friggin' hat.
That's right, man. Well, guys, do you have anything you want to, before we close this bad boy up, is there anything else you guys want to add or anything you're particularly looking forward to?
I want to see if they go into the deconstruction of the Bulls.
You're muted again, babe.
Sorry. Like, was there a thought, like, you know what? Let's try to win 4 in a row. That's kind of one question. Or was it like, nah, let's just turn it down because there was an NBA lockout the following season, be like, hey, listen, we only got to go through 50 games. You don't have to go through as many games. So I wonder, did they even think about trying to win a 4th title?
That would be very fascinating. I'm kind of curious to see too with the deconstruction, but just like how more in depth they want to go. Like it seems like we kind of have a blueprint for the last 2 episodes. They've kind of set the time frame up. We're getting close to 1998 on the front side. And then the backside with all the flashbacks is pretty much almost caught up with everything. So, I'm excited for the last 2 episodes, but it's almost seeming a little bit anticlimactic for me. And I guess that's because, like Nate said, we already know the outcome of the story, but there's definitely things that they could do to, I guess, pique my interest and everybody else's interest a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I'm expecting them to tie it up with a nice little bow, and everyone walks off into the sunset, and it's going to be kind of your picture perfect ending. And
let's all hug and kiss.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the way I think they're going to go. But I've been surprised before with the series. Anyway, guys, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you on social media? Start with you, Joshua.
Well, they can, of course, find me on social media on Twitter at Joshua Griffith 0. And they can make sure to check out my live show right here on this YouTube channel, the Sports Talkline channel, the Unnamed Canadian Sports Show. That's Thursdays at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern time. I should probably say the time.
And Tom, where can we find you, big boy?
Find me on Twitter at defense_com, at defense, DFENDS_com. Nice talking with you guys.
Absolutely. And you guys should go ahead and follow them. Why? I do it, so you should do it too. And you can follow me, the man with no remorse, Nate Dowdy, at No Remorse Sports. And for the last time, there are no spaces. Anyway, guys, I'm going to settle off into the sunset and give my best Stephen Vanover impression right here. Listen like you play with intensity.